Hi, I'm Kim, and this is an oasis of books. Today I want to do a quick wrap-up of Q3 Historathon, what I read and what I thought of it. And then I want to spend the bulk of the video sharing with you my big pile of possibilities for Q4 Historathon. Now, Q3 covers the time period 1500 to 1820 CE. And then from 1820 to the present, we have Q4. Now for Q3, I had quite a few little possibilities, and you can check out my video I did way back at the beginning of Q3 to see what those possibilities were. But what did I end up reading? Well, I did read, as I thought I would, Blair Worden's The English Civil Wars, 1640 to 1660. And I chose this because I had heard about a fictional book that I wanted to read that was set during the English Civil Wars. And I thought this would give me really good background information. And I'm really glad I chose this book because, as you can see, it is not that thick. It's concise, but Blair Worden is considered a very reputable historian, and he did his job well researching all of this. And his writing style is very readable. I enjoyed it. It wasn't, stupendous, but it's a nonfiction book. It flowed very easily. I never felt drugged down at all. It was understandable, and that's important when you're dealing especially with, names and dates, and actually many of those names being quite similar, if not exactly the same. So I'm really glad I read this book because it gave me just the right background information I was looking for, so I wouldn't be completely lost when I started reading the historical fiction books set in this time period. And it worked perfectly. So yeah, great choice. And if you haven't read about the English Civil Wars yet, this is a good place to start, a nice solid core. Now, I was also going to read this book, not so concise, as you can see, quite thick. About 600 pages. This is The English Civil War, Papists, Gentlewomen, Soldiers, and Witchfinders in the Birth of Modern Britain by Diane Purkiss. Now, I got about a third of the way through this big book, and let me say, I really did like it. Purkiss is very thorough in both her research and in her writing, and gives you a perspective you don't really see in a lot of history books. Sure, the big events and the, big people are talked about, but what I loved about this, and as you can see in the subtitle, and it holds true, the common people are really discussed in this book. We get their views. We see what was happening to them during all this time. And the bit that I read, the third of it that I read, also really helped lay the groundwork for the historical fiction books I read in a way that the other spine that was dealing more with the facts of the, the important people and events didn't cover. So I will definitely be reading the rest of this book next year for Historathon Q3. The other book I read for Historathon Q3 was Contest for California, from Spanish Colonization to the American Conquest by Stephen Hislop. Now, I have a thing for California history, as I've mentioned frequently on this channel. I read voraciously, both nonfiction and fiction, to do with California history. All time periods, although my special focus is the Gold Rush or mid-19th century. So this fit in perfectly for both my personal California history reading project and Q3 of Historathon. Well, the first half of this book did. So this book is divided into 4 parts, and the first 2 parts occur from 1769 up through about 1825, and then the latter 2 parts go from there just through about 1848, only a 25-year period, but so much happened during that. Not events that happened during Q3 of Historathon, but I finished the book anyway because, well, I wanted to read the last half of the book. It was really good. This historian is quite well known and quite well respected, and his research is not only chock full of primary sources and very, very detailed, but he goes into areas that I haven't seen other California historians do, and I really appreciated that. And, at that time in California's history, we had so many different components, people components, when the first half of this book, the Q3 part, really deals with the Spanish colonization. Well, when the Spaniards came in, People were already here. Of course, the Native Americans who'd been here for centuries, but also the Mexicans who had been living here for quite a long time as well. And then in this book, we see how they blended together, and the Mexican and Spaniard combination, later known as the Californios, became a very strong, important part of California's history. The huge rancheros or properties of these people, they were so rich and so gorgeous and so important to the local politics at that time. And the ranchos, meaning the cattle ranchers, which is what made them so rich, they had so many cattle then there is no way they could have made full use of the meat. Their main products for export were the tallow and the hides. They, of course, used the meat they needed, but other than that, it would go to waste, so they offered it for free to anybody passing through as long as they, staked up the hide for the owners to make use of. Just a little tidbit of history for you there. Anyway, this was a great read, and I'm going to definitely look for more by Stephen Hislop. All right, time for Historathon Q4 Pile of Possibilities. And I have 11 books in my pile from 2 different categories. 6 of them are from California history, and 5 of them cover something completely different, the United States National Park system. How it started, how it developed through the years, and how it's doing today. First up, the California history books, and I will save the one I'm most excited about for last. I just received it for my birthday last week from one of my kids, and I'm so excited. I've been eyeing it since it came out recently, and well, she knew that, and she got it for me. But first, here are some books that I've had on my shelf, and one I just stumbled upon at the library the other day. We've got H.W. Brand's The Age of Gold, The California Gold Rush, and The New American Dream. Brands is an excellent, prolific writer in the area of California history, so I'm really glad to get to this one. The back of the book mentions that Brands tells his epic story from multiple perspectives of adventurers, including John and Jesse Fremont, entrepreneur Leland Stanford, you might have heard of him, the Rye observer Samuel Clemens, better known as Mark Twain, and also the everyday common people like soldiers and prospectors, scoundrels too. From another book of his I read, I know that Brands has a way of making the stories of these people come to life. He pulls in so much research that it just fills out all the details, and it's just a vibrant, exciting experience, and really looking forward to delving into it. Next up, I've got An Ordinary Woman by Cecilia Holland. This is the story, the remarkable story of the first American woman in California. I've had this on my shelf for a while. It sounds very interesting, so I can't wait to get into it. This book is about Nancy Kelsey, who traveled with her husband and baby daughter as a pioneer across the entire plains from Missouri to California in 1841. Cecilia Holland lets us hear from Nancy in her own words, as well as from the others who are traveling with her, and I am really looking forward to hearing this story. Now here I've got something different, Women Trailblazers of California. Pioneers to the Present by Gloria Harris and Hannah Cohen. So this does start with the pioneers, but it goes all the way up through the current time. So there are 10 different categories of women represented here, and it's divided into 3 sections based on how these women contributed to California. So the first section is women of early California, and there are 2 categories here. Pioneers and settlers. And within each category, 4 women are covered. So Nancy Kelsey is the first one. We just talked about her in that last book, but there are 3 others. In settlers, 4 more women. Then in section 2, we have women who contributed to social and political change. And the categories are suffragists, reformers and activists, and environmentalists and conservationists. And again, 4 women in each of those categories. The third section is women who contributed to the world of work, and our categories are doctors and dentists, lawyers, educators, architects, and entertainers, and once more 4 women in each category. So if we've got 10 categories and there's 4 women in each, we've got 40 amazing women talked about in this book. I know there's lots of photographs in here, lots of primary source material, so this is just going to be really enjoyable. And I like these kinds of books because you can pick them up and put them down, you know, as need be. You don't have to, and you're not tempted to, just keep reading and reading late into the night because there's definite stopping points. And yet I'm sure these profiles are going to be so interesting that I'm going to want to keep on reading. So I look forward to sharing about this with you later. And then another book from one of my many California history shelves is Sierra Crossings, First Roads to California by Thomas Frederick Howard. Now, this book is a book mostly of geography as it tackles the big obstacle of the Sierra Nevada mountains that were in the way of anyone trying to get to California and Oregon. So the first wagon train, official wagon train that got through wasn't until 1844. Howard covers the earlier crossers and how they managed it. And as our state librarian Kevin Starr says, having read this book, one will never again think simply about roadways, from Native American trails to overland stage routes and the railways and freeways that were to follow. Each axis of approach coaxed from the land and from the people who crossed the land the highest levels of engineering skills and dialogue with nature. I love geography, geology, and of course, California history. So this is a gap in my education that I'm really looking forward to filling and enjoying. Now, the second to last California history book that's in my pile of possibilities is one I just saw and checked out from the library. As soon as I saw the author and the title, I knew I hadn't read it before, but I love Rebecca Solnit. And this is Infinite City, a San Francisco atlas. Now, you might think with the term atlas in the title, it's just a book of maps, but that's not the case at all. What makes a place? Infinite City, Rebecca Solnit's brilliant reinvention of the traditional atlas, searches out the answer by examining the many layers of meaning, culture, and history in one locale, the San Francisco Bay Area. Aided by artists, writers, and cartographers, Solnit has compiled 22 gorgeous color maps, each of which illuminates San Francisco and its surroundings as experienced by different inhabitants. Infinite City takes us on a tour that will forever change the way we think about place. Now, if you've never read Rebecca Solnit before, she writes a lot of various things, a lot of essays, a lot of nonfiction books. She is a great thinker, a great critical thinker. She's an activist for nature, for the arts, for social rights, for so many things. It's hard to describe her. She is that important of a person and that important of a writer. Been very encouraging to me over the last year or so, and continues to be so. And since I love the San Francisco Bay Area so much, I grew up about an hour away from it and now live about 2.5 hours northwest of it. I visit there often, have some kids that live there, and you know, it was the gateway to the gold rush, so of course I love it anyway. Because I love it so much, this has been a book that has been on my radar, never seen it though, and now here it is. Now the last California history book that I'm going to read for Q4 of Historathon. It's the one I'm most excited about by far. It is Mark Twain. This is a biography written by Ron Chernow, and he is Pulitzer Prize winning author for his biographies of Grant and Alexander Hamilton. Now, everybody knows Mark Twain, right? You know it's a pen name, and his real name was Samuel Langhorne Clemens, born in 1835. He grew up to become this immortalized author that had such a huge effect on the American culture. I saw the cover of this book, and because I recognized the author and knew how great he is, I knew I had to have it, because Mark Twain is such an amazingly interesting, fascinating character in American history. And that's what he was, a character that he devised himself, created himself. Let me read to you from the inside Flyleaf, because it does a great job explaining about Mark Twain. In this richly nuanced portrait of Mark Twain, acclaimed biographer Ron Chernow brings his considerable powers to bear on a man who shamelessly sought fame and fortune. And after establishing himself as a journalist, satirist, and lecturer, he eventually settled down in Hartford, Connecticut, with his wife and 3 daughters to write The Adventures of Tom Sawyer and The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. He threw himself into the hurly-burly of American culture and emerged as the nation's most notable political pundit. At the same time, his madcap business ventures eventually bankrupted him. To economize, Twain and his family spent 9 eventful years in exile in Europe. However, he suffered the death of his wife and 2 of his 3 daughters, and the last stage of his life was marked by heartache, political crusades, and very eccentric behavior. Drawing on Twain's bountiful archives, including thousands of letters and hundreds of unpublished manuscripts, Chernow masterfully captures the man whose career reflected the country's westward expansion, industrialization, and foreign wars, and who was the most important white author of his generation to grapple so fully with the legacy of slavery. Today, more than 100 years after his death, Twain's writing continues to be read, debated, and quoted. So I think you can see why I can't wait to read this. You might want to get your hands on this too. Now I want to talk about the 5 books I'm reading that cover the national parks here in the United States. This is one book I had on my shelf for a little while, National Parks, The American Experience by Alfred Runt. And it tells us, how we got the national parks and how along the way we have sometimes failed our parks and therefore failed ourselves. It really focuses on how the parks prioritize and emphasize and celebrate our unique American feature of nature, which mostly is space. So I'm looking forward to reading this. It's been newly updated. It has some great art in it, paintings, as well as some period photographs. So yeah, this will be fun. However, it's what triggered me to go look for other books on the national parks. And boy, did I find some cool ones. I have ordered a few from the library, and I have a few that I still need to get my hands on, but I'm definitely going to try to do it so that I can read them for Q4 because they look so good. Let's talk about them. First up is The National Parks, America's Best Idea. This was published in 2009, written by Dayton Duncan and the very well-known Ken Burns of documentary fame. Yes, now this covers all of the national parks in glorious full color, and we get to see them in all of their individual glory. It talks about the beginning of the parks and how they evolved through the years, the myth-making that happened, and the political battles that ensued. It also introduces us to a lot of people, apparently, that are involved with the parks in one way or another through the years. Some of them well-known, like Theodore Roosevelt, obviously, and John Muir. These are people who were really committed to the national parks because they had found themselves transformed by the beauty they discovered there. And in being committed to saving them, they saved them for all of us as well, so we could go experience them and be transformed too in our own ways. Here's a book I found that I think is so intriguing. It's called The Power of Scenery, Frederick Law Olmsted and the Origin of the National Parks, written by Dennis Drabel. Now, Olmsted was the architect, the great landscape architect for Yosemite Valley's park. Now, Yosemite was the wilderness park owned by the state that sort of set the stage for the national park system to follow. Olmsted really didn't want our national parks to end up the way that even then the Niagara Falls area was turning out, sort of like a tourist carnival. So it says that he saw city parks as vital to the pursuit of happiness and wanted them to be established for all to enjoy. So the marketing for this book says that Olmsted wrote down his philosophy for managing Yosemite, a new and different kind of park, to preserve a great natural site in the wilds, having no idea he was creating a visionary blueprint for the national parks to come. Dennis Drabel provides a history of the national park concept, adding to our understanding of American environmental thought and linking Olmsted with 3 of the country's national treasures. So this book, The Power of Scenery, not only shares how the national park system here in the U.S. started but how it was really intricately designed and how it evolved and even has spread around the world. Now, the two national park books I'm still trying to find. I might even buy them myself. I'm going to take a look at them in person and see if I think they're a good investment. They probably are. And maybe I'll ask for them for Christmas. The first is called A Place Called Yellowstone, The Epic History of the World's First National Park, published in 2024, written by Randall Wilson. This book looks both gorgeous and fascinating and, well, really thought-provoking. Of course, there are wonderful photographs throughout of Yellowstone, which has been called, America's Wonderland, America's Serengeti, the crown jewel, really, of our national park system. There was also, though, a lot of controversy involved with Yellowstone from the beginning through the years, really. And I talked about some of this in the video I did, I think it was my August wrap-up, where I discussed the book, historical fiction book I read by Diane Smith, entitled Letters from Yellowstone, which was set in Yellowstone just before the beginning of the 19th century, right after the national park system had been established. And yeah, some of those issues were prevalent even then. And yes, many of these issues of conflict and exclusion were present from the beginning. And we have been trying to figure them out all along the way, sometimes much better than others. But we've been dealing with the precedents that were set for Native American dispossession, many land dispute rights amongst different people related to Yellowstone, and the big conflict between commercialism and environmental conservation. So that's definitely a book that I want to read, and I'll probably read it first of all the national park books I'm looking at, because it does follow so naturally after the Letters from Yellowstone amazing historical fiction book that I read recently. And then the last one in my national parks category for Historathon Q4 that I'm thinking is a definite read just because of my interest in climate change is called Requiem for America's Best Idea, National Parks in the Era of Climate Change. So this book was written by Michael Joachim, I think that's how you pronounce it, published in 2022. He actually wrote this book while he was struggling with ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, and he made a connection somehow, drew a parallel between his own personal struggles with this terminal illness and the effect that climate change is having on our national parks. And apparently he had dedicated his life in his writing to preserving and celebrating our national wilderness areas. And so this book is said to be quite thought-provoking and quite moving, and I'm really looking forward to reading it as it investigates the interactions between people and nature and the world that can both inspire them and destroy them. So that's what I've got in my Historathon Q4 pile of possibilities, an 11-book tall stack of potential reads that all sound incredibly good to me. And well, thankfully, I've got 3 months to read them, a whole quarter and not just October. I am really looking forward to them. I'm also looking forward to watching all the other Historathon Q4 videos and seeing what everybody else is planning on reading. I'm sure I'll get lots of other great recommendations to add to my TBR for the coming months and years. Well, until my next video, thanks for watching this one, and I wish you much wonderful reading.